Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, the show where we cut through cybersecurity noise and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. This podcast is built around one core idea: cyber fusion. A cyber fusion center brings together IT security, operational technology, engineering insight, and human risk into a single coordinated defense strategy. So threats are detected earlier, response is faster, and operation stays running. Each episode, we sit down with security leaders, operators, and industry experts to unpack the real threats facing modern organizations, especially where cyber risk becomes operational risk. No hype, no theory, just practical insight on cyber resilience, operational continuity, and defending critical systems without disruption. If you're responsible for uptime, safety, or business continuity, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, where we cut through cybersecurity theory and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. I'm your host, Gary Mullen, and I'm joined once again today by the three Chris's, three professionals at FishCloud who bring decades of experience aligning security with operational realities in industrial environments that we live in every day. Chris Weule, Director of Operational Technologies, Cyber Fusion, and Strategy, and also the holder of the longest title in our company. Chris Wightman, Senior OT Threat Hunter, and Chris Mosley, OT Threat Detection and Response Analyst. The rise of AI agents promised productivity gains and automation like we have never seen before. Tools like OpenClaw let users automate email, calendars, and workflows in ways that once belonged to developers. But this promise has a dangerous underside. Security researchers have uncovered a coordinated malware campaign and widespread insecure agent extensions in the OpenClaw ecosystem that expose local systems, credentials, even cryptographic assets through what should be innocuous add-ons. These aren't abstract vulnerabilities on paper. They are real malware, credential leaks, and supply chains compromises lurking in extension marketplaces that many users trust. In today's episode, we break down how AI agent marketplaces become attack surfaces, why the OpenClaw model amplifies risk, and what defenders need to understand how to protect users, systems, and data from threats that bypass traditional security controls. So let's jump right in. The first question goes to you, Mr. Weule. What fundamental architectural and security assumptions underlie AI agent marketplaces like ClawHub, and why are those assumptions failing to protect users today?
This is the right place to start, because before we talk about specific campaigns or malware families, we need to understand why these marketplaces are structurally vulnerable. And the answer comes down to a set of design assumptions that were carried over from the App Store and package manager era without really accounting for how fundamentally different AI agents really are. The first assumption is trust by default. ClawHub was built on a model where anyone with a GitHub account, one that's only a week old, by the way, can publish a skill. No code signing, no meaningful security review, no sandbox testing before it goes live. The implicit assumption is that the community will self-police, that downloads and ratings will surface good skills and push bad ones down. But as we saw with the Claw Havoc campaign, attackers gamed the system deliberately. The number one ranked skill on ClawHub was functionally malware, and it got there through 4,000 faked downloads. Real users then installed it thousands of times because they trusted that ranking. The second assumption is that the traditional attack surface model applies. In a conventional software package, the threat is malicious code, something that executes and does something harmful. Security tools like VirusTotal are built to scan for that, but OpenClaw introduced an entirely new attack surface that SNCC has appropriately called the instructional supply chain. the malicious payload isn't in the code. It's the skill.md file, the documentation that tells the agent what to do. That's a markdown file with natural language instructions, and it can contain prompt injections that it tells the agent to bypass safety guidelines, download the external payload, or exfiltrate data. Traditional code scanning completely misses this because there's no malicious code to find. And the third assumption is, this is a big one. It's that the agent permissions are the user's responsibilities. OpenClaw runs on your local machine. If it has access to your system file, your credentials, your keystrokes, your browser data, your API keys, your SSH keys, your cloud credentials, when you install a skill, that skill inherits all of those permissions. There are no granular permission models. There's no, this skill can only access your calendar, but not your file system. It's all or nothing. And the marketplace was designed with the assumption that users would understand and manage that risk themselves. When you combine all three of these assumptions, low barriers to publish, an attack surface that bypasses traditional scanning, and a flat permission model where every skill gets the keys to the kingdom, you get exactly what we're seeing. Over 340 malicious skills discovered in a single campaign. Over 135,000 exposed instances globally. Nation states like Kimsuky and APT28 correlating with over a third of exposed infrastructure, according to Security Scorecard. Belgium issuing emergency advisories. South Korean companies blocking OpenClaw across corporate networks entirely. The fundamental problem is design versus threat model mismatches. These marketplaces were designed for developer productivity and rapid ecosystem growth. They were not designed with a threat model that accounts for adversaries who understand that the agent itself, the AI, can be weaponized through its own instruction set. And until that architectural gap is addressed at the platform level, every downstream security measure is playing catch up.
Thanks, Chris. And it sounds like a major open threat here. We know that recent research shows hundreds of malicious agent skills that have credential theft and backdoor functionality. Mr. Wightman, how do these supply chain threats compare to more traditional software package risks like NPM or PyPy? What makes them uniquely dangerous?
Well, we've been talking about malicious packages like NPM for a long time, and we have safeguards in place and mechanisms in place to provide that kind of security and trust layer associated with them. And they're pretty much inspectable at this point. With AI and these agents and the skills, we're pretty much, from a security standpoint, where we were with NPM in 2015, like a decade ago. We're just learning about it, trying to figure it out. And we haven't envisioned or seen all the ways it can be abused. So it's so nascent and moving so rapidly, the security's not caught up yet. When we talk about packages, they're, like I said, they're well understood. They're largely discrete code that are essentially human readable and now, machine readable. So they can be evaluated prior to implementation. There's a plethora of capabilities out there right now, Claude Code, whatever you want to do to inspect these things. Chris mentioned VirusTotal, right? Is it a mimic of a clone of a package that's actually malicious? So you can do, hash comparisons and things like that. So we have those now for packages in our traditional software, even for updates. When you're talking about supply chain, there's been cases where an update is compromised, and that update gets pushed to every user of the software who is then compromised. The nice thing about these packages typically is that you can inspect the update before it gets pushed. You have that opportunity to do so. From a defender standpoint, most of these types of applications or capabilities that are using NPM, the Python plugins and stuff like that, they usually run under the context of probably a service or a very limited privileged service associated and clearly associated with a particular process or application. That's much easier to monitor. Like, hey, this is not a user context. This is exactly what this particular thing is doing. So from that defender standpoint on packages and your traditional software, whether it be vendor or homegrown, becomes easier. As Chris had mentioned, these AI skills, they operate in the context of the user or the agent, often with full local permissions. And that makes it much harder to defend against or identify if it presents a risk, because any sort of monitoring will likely produce a ton of false positives if you try to alert on it or even audit it. And a lot of these agents, they're being developed by highly privileged users. They are developers. They are the people with the admin rights to the servers and the machines to which they're being deployed. So they are just passing on that thing. So it's not just a software supply chain vulnerability. It's a user supply chain or developer supply chain vulnerability that needs to be considered when companies decide to start implementing these sort of things and trying to take advantage of what's honestly an amazing technology. But we'll get into it a little bit later, and I'm not going to get ahead of myself like we already are. So even, with the Claw Havocs stuff, as Chris said, there wasn't malicious code to inspect. There was just instructions, documents, markdown files, memory files, things for persistence. Having that evaluated and really inspecting that prior to implementation would be really difficult. And to realize that to have full understanding of what permissions and capabilities you are giving and what this skill is actually doing or capable of doing in the future, should someone choose to weaponize it. Like you mentioned, I think Chris mentioned Claw Havoc. Like there was no malicious code. There was kind of anomalous instructions, which could be changed at any time and weaponized. From the concept of supply chain, I guess you could build out an entire pre-prod infrastructure and put severe monitoring on it, completely run the agent with the skills and monitor it for a period of time. See what it reaches out to that you may not have caught in your initial review. Like, is it making network calls? Is it calling services? Is it reaching out to internal network resources that don't serve any function associated with why you are using that particular skill or agent? Those are some things you could potentially do. That's really heavy lift. It's heavy lift, a lot of infrastructure that would need to be created, costly, slow, and kind of minimally effective because you're probably not going to look at it for more than a month. And that doesn't really compare to the patience of an attacker. Right now, some of the things Chris mentioned also, like the mechanisms that are available and are in place for packages in normal software supply chain, they don't exist for the AI supply chain. You don't have certifications. You don't have a trust model. You don't have signing of certain pieces of equipment. So honestly, we do have a lot to figure out. There's no reason why we couldn't apply what we experienced in 2015 to what we're experiencing now. The modularity of the AI ecosystem compared to the modularity of a Python or other software development ecosystem.
Okay. So let's get a defender's perspective on this, Mr. Mosley. So in many cases, malicious skills inherit full agent permissions, accessing file systems, credentials, network resources, etc. How should that change the way we think about trust boundaries and agent execution permissions?
What it kind of boils down to with this is that comes down to kind of how do we architect the problem differently, not how do we adjust what we already have, right? We have to kind of, from the ground up, come up with a new solution, right? Because a lot of times these agent skills have all of the permissions and all of the access that the agent itself has. The agent has almost all the permissions to your system, right? And this creates a lot of vulnerabilities. Like in the case of OpenClaw, like Chris was talking about earlier, right? It's got access to executing shell commands. It's got access to reading and writing files, browsing the web, access your keychain, all these other things. Any skills that OpenClaw has suddenly have all of those other permissions. Right. So it comes down to following like the principle of least privilege at the skill level so that the skill can only do the one thing. It doesn't have access to everything that the agent has access to. We also might need to set up some form of explicit denial, right? Default denial, explicit allow. So that way, by default, if it tries to do something it's not intended to do, it's going to be blocked, and we have to explicitly allow it, hey, you're allowed to do, X, Y, and Z. Additionally, we have to get some more visibility into like how the skills are working and what they're doing, and be able to kind of monitor what they're doing in real time. So we don't want to have a case where, like Chris was saying in that example of, there was that malicious skill that was uploaded. It had 4,000 fake downloads. And they use that to convince real people to download it. If we had the ability to look into what the skill itself was doing before downloading it or while it was running, you'd be able to see, hey, here's all of the bad things it's doing. And then another thing we need to get is a behavioral baseline, in the sense of how do most of these skills typically access? Like, how do they function? What are they accessing? What are they doing? So that way, if one of these skills does do something out of the ordinary, out of the baseline, it becomes much more apparent that something malicious is happening, because we already have the baseline of this is supposed to look like, and obviously it's not looking like that.
Okay, great. So it's pretty clear from the conversation that these agent skills are insecure by design, right? They leak API keys, leak sensitive data in plain text. Mr. Wightman, as before these agent skills go public, what kind of vetting or validation or sandboxing should be mandatory to make sure that these skills aren't insecure by design?
I like this question. It's extremely important. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had much more broadly. These technologies, capabilities, they come out so quickly and they're happening faster, and then organizations have this strong motivation to implement them as quickly as possible, with this mindset of do it now or fall behind the competition. While the development availability and the demand is great, there's some lessons we probably should remember from our past in that security should not be an afterthought. I think that's what we're seeing. There's no code signing, right? We touched on that. There's no trust models. It's pretty much use at your own risk, pressure to implement something you don't fully understand. And that really presents a lot of risk that you could literally embed deeply into your enterprise network. Mentioning OpenClaw and ClawHub, they're popular, very open to being abused, and they were. And really no corrective action has been taken, to my knowledge, as of yet, on these kind of really open repositories. And then the trust models Wiley mentioned don't really exist either. Like, who do you trust? Or there's this inherent trust, like, hey, it's published, it must be good. Every developer of a skill or an agent has good intentions, proven false. So there's that inherent trust, and that really needs to change. I think we need to rebuild, or to some extent duplicate, the trust models and mechanisms in the AI ecosystem that we currently have in the standard software ecosystem, in terms of what could be done pre-production. Similar to what was mentioned earlier, build a complete CI/CD pipeline, pre-prod environment, heavy investigation for a period of time. And yet again, it's not equitable, produces not a ton of value. And it's just, in turn, makes it not very realistic that that'll happen. One of the things I would expect to see is that the community, the AI community, starts building that trust model, where repositories need to demonstrate their commitment to security and gain a reputation of being trustworthy. So there's a nice downward pressure, and also a forcing factor for others to be as security aware. So I could imagine certain repositories incorporating AI enabled code review. Everything that gets submitted to their platform goes through code review for at least minimal vulnerabilities, not purely ensuring it's not malicious, but just bad, non-secure, not security by design type of code, and then hold a standard. That goes back to the developer. They fix all their vulnerabilities, and at that point, a repository can publish it. When they publish it, they're essentially signing it and putting their name behind it. So they start gaining a level of trust and respect from the community, which in turn makes them the most popular repository and trusted repository, pulling people away from these untrusted open repositories that will eventually die because organizations won't use them. I think those repositories that have this kind of function, it's almost like a signing function, they're going to rise to the top. But also the developers are going to benefit from the same reputational reinforcement. So whether they post on one repository or another, they're known for being a secure developer, non-malicious and secure at the same time. So I like that aspect. From a, what can we do, control standpoint, At the enterprise level, I think there's a couple relatively easy things that can be done both at policy and technical arenas from a policy perspective, right? How do we protect ourselves from this sort of thing? If things are signed or not signed, doesn't matter. Well, determine what repositories you trust. Only allowed downloads and implementation from those repositories as a matter of policy. Require software bill of materials and very detailed software bill materials as you would with any application or project to include all aspects, dependencies, agents, skills, and make that review. Then just roll that into your accreditation and authorization pipeline. From a technical control perspective, if you do get to the point where things are signed, or at least labeled with a trusted source, you can ensure things aren't downloaded, used, or even present on a machine that aren't from that particular developer or come from a certain repository. Continuous monitoring, again, looks very much like regular vulnerability scanning, which we're all very, very familiar with. And now you can start looking at hashes like you do for software today or non-associated software today. So we really do need to what we already know, recreate what we already know, and incorporate AI as a capability the same way we do any software updates or anything like that.
Okay, great. Next question goes to you, Mr. Mosley. What does this ecosystem's risk profile tell us about the limitations of traditional endpoint security and vulnerability scanning as well when confronted with AI-driven autonomy and agentic capabilities?
So this comes down to kind of the main issue we're struggling with right now in the current climate, we'll call it, where AI is evolving super fast, and I don't want to say struggling to keep up with it, but it's causing us a lot of problems. And when it comes to things like traditional endpoint security, it assumes a lot of things such as like a lot of the attacks will be very similar or the same, static predictable behavior, right? And with AI, it doesn't necessarily have to be, like we saw with the OpenClaw, where it's not necessarily like a malicious file or a malicious script that is easily identifiable. It's like this totally new brand of problem we have to be looking at. These AI agents will be, dynamically modifying their execution paths and have these emergent behaviors that we initially weren't really expecting. And that loops into the vulnerability scanning, right? Very difficult to vulnerability scan for something that constantly changes, constantly evolves its own capabilities. A lot of the assumptions about vulnerability scanning and endpoint detection, or endpoint security, kind of break under this AI lens that we were dealing with. Because, you've got like these traditionally, right, you're dealing with static attack surfaces, like I mentioned before, where it scans for known binaries, known vulnerabilities in the code. Whereas now with AI, we're dealing with these agents that can kind of create their own vulnerability, find their own workarounds around these already existing detection parameters. Another one of the issues that kind of falls into a problem here is that CVE cycles, they take days, if not weeks, to come out with these documentation for, hey, there's a threat out here. Hey, there's all these problems. Whereas these AI agents, they make decisions on what they want to do in milliseconds. They adapt in real time to what they're looking at, what they're working on. And, two prompts, minutes to days apart can have two different solutions to the same problem just because of how many variables and other things may have come into play. And then going back to the kind of the behavior side of things, there's the signature-based detection of, malicious patterns that the endpoint and vulnerability scans use to let you know, hey, there's a vulnerability, hey, there's a problem on your system. And with AI, like I mentioned before, there's that emergent capability that they have where the AI might not be explicitly programmed to do or look for something, but because it's designed to help you, do what you're asking for, it'll find a way, right? It'll get there. And what we're finding is that the solution tends to be like a fundamental shift in approach, going from those periodic vulnerability scans where it takes, too long to find the problem, to continuous behavioral monitoring, treating, AI systems like an active, I don't want to say threat, but an active thing to monitor rather than, we'll check on it, on patch day.
So it sounds like we've got a lot of work to do, Mr. Weule. And as we wrap things up here, I think this final question, you can hopefully shed some light on where we go from here. So given all of this information and these findings that we've heard here, what are the immediate steps that executives and security leaders should take to protect their data, their credentials, their workflows, all that depend on AI agents in their production environment?
So We've spent this episode talking about how serious these threats are. I guess now is the time we talk about what you actually do about it. So I want to frame this as immediate practical steps, not like a 5-year roadmap that just, keeps on going, but things that security leaders should be doing this week. So step 1, discover and inventory every AI agent deployment in your environment. So it's not optional. CrowdStrike published research showing that they built specific workflows to detect and even remove OpenClaw instances across endpoints because organizations didn't know these were running in their networks. This is shadow IT at its most dangerous, because unlike rogue SaaS subscriptions, an unsecured AI agent can, on a corporate machine with access to credentials and internal systems, it's an active attack vector. You need to find them, catalog them, and understand what they're connected to. Step 2, if you have OpenClaw or similar AI agents in production, perform an immediate skill audit. Purge any skills downloaded from ClawHub or similar unvetted repositories in recent months. Security researchers are recommending that across the board, and given that nearly 12% of all of ClawHub's marketplace was flagged as malicious, the risk of having a compromised skill installed on your system is not theoretical, it's a statistical fact. Step 3, credential rotation. If any AI agent in your environment has had access to API keys, SSH keys, cloud credentials, service tokens, or gateway authentication tokens, rotate them, all of them. Hudson Rock's research showed that InfoStealer malware is specifically targeting OpenClaw configuration files because those files contain gateway tokens and API keys for every connected surface. If those credentials were exfiltrated, rotating them is the only way to close that level of exposure. Step 4, network isolation and access restriction. Any AI agent that must remain in production should be network segmented. It should not have unrestricted access to internal resources, implement firewall rules that restrict, we need to implement rules that restrict what the agent can reach. The default Docker deployment of OpenClaw binds all network interfaces. That's 0.0.0, which is why over 135,000 instances were found exposed to the internet. Even for internal deployments, the agent should be behind proper access controls and should absolutely not be reachable from the public internet. Step 5, we establish an AI agent governance policy. This is the executive level action item. Your organization needs a clear policy on what AI agents are approved for use, what permissions they're allowed to have, what data they can access, and what vetting process, skills, or extensions must go through before they are deployed within your environment. Chris Wightman's recommendation of an AI CI/CD pipeline is excellent here. Treat agent skill deployment with the same rigor you treat code deployment. Pre-production testing, security monitoring in a sandbox environment, and a formal gate before anything reaches your production environment. Step 6, update your threat model. If your enterprise threat model doesn't include AI agent compromise, prompt injection, instructional supply chain attacks, it's incomplete. These are not emerging threats anymore. They're active threats. They happen now. Belgium's Center for Cybersecurity issued emergency advisories. China's MIIT published security alerts. Major South Korean companies blocked OpenClaw entirely. Security Scorecard found nation-state correlations with exposed OpenClaw infrastructure. This is not hypothetical risk. It's right here, it's right now, it's documented, and it's being actively exploited. And finally, step 7, brief your leadership and your board. AI agents represent a new category of risk that doesn't fit neatly into existing cybersecurity frameworks. Executives need to understand that this isn't another vulnerability to patch. It's a fundamentally different attack surface that requires new controls, new policies, and in many cases, new investment. The organizations that get ahead of this now will be in a much stronger position than those who wait until they're dealing with the consequences on the backside. I know that's a lot, but the reality of the situation demands urgency. The good news is that every one of these steps is actionable today. You don't need a new platform or a 6-month implementation timeline. You need visibility, governance, and a willingness to treat AI agent security with the same seriousness that you apply to any other critical attack surface.
So AI is producing a great deal of efficiencies within organizations, and we've seen a number of companies out there do major layoffs as they prepare to implement AI more extensively in their organization. But as we've seen here today, the threat that is introduced as a result can be very impactful to an organization. Thank you once again to the three Chris's for joining us today. What we are seeing in this OpenClaw and ClawHub ecosystem is not just a bug or a research curiosity. It is a supply chain threat merged with AI autonomy, where agents with elevated permissions execute third-party code that can exfiltrate credentials, run reverse shells, and compromise systems without leaving traces that your traditional security tools are designed to catch. This episode should leave you with three core takeaways. First, agent marketplaces are software supply chains in the same way that NPM and PyPy are. They require vetting, signing, and runtime controls. Second, granting an AI agent broad access to file systems and network resources changes your security problem from can we patch the bug to can we trust what we install? And third, without architectural isolation and threat modeling tailored to agentic ecosystems, organizations will be blindsided by attacks that bypass traditional tooling and control assumptions. Security cannot be an afterthought in AI integration. It must be built in from the start with visibility, governance, and threat-aware design. The world of autonomous AI agents has arrived, and now it's up to us to protect it. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Gary Mullen, and we'll see you next time. This has been the Cyber Fusion Report podcast. Thanks for joining us, and for more information, please visit www.fishcloud.com or email us at cfc@fishcloud.com. Thanks and have a great day.